Hello, and thank you for this opportunity. I'm not sure what more I can say when both Professor Hassan and Vrinda, one of our most prominent lawyers, is actually fighting on this issue. I want to try and just make a few points in a more self-critical moment. My comments are addressed as a member of the women's movement, women's studies, and to all progressive, as I'm sure you all are, progressive forces. Looking, again, I will provide a little bit of history to this amazing, the UCC has to be the longest standing issue in the women's movement and the most debated issue of the women's movement. We are not very good at debating each other. Please, we are not good at that. We usually fight each other and stop talking to each other. This is one where we have debated, and I'll say a little bit about that. And yet we are at this point. You know, why are we at this point? So let me just go back a little bit to the history, where the women's organizations were formed in the early 20th century, in the colonial time. UCC, you know that personal laws were created by the colonial government. I think you all know this, right? And for reasons which were accidental but deeply, deeply consequential, the colonial government decided that the sphere of women's lives, that is family life, marriage, divorce, having children, inheritance, that this should be governed by religion. Why wasn't criminal law to be governed by religion? Why wasn't any number of other aspects to be governed by religion? No, this had to be governed by religion. This has had huge consequences. So you can imagine why women's organizations in the early 20th century made the idea, it was their question. UCC, let us be clear, it is not an imposition of the BJP. It was our question. The women's organizations of the early 20th century wanted a common code. In what context? And this is very important for us to think about when we think about today. In a context where Hindu women had absolutely no rights as wives, as daughters, zero. And where Muslim women had a considerable amount of rights in the form of contract at the time of marriage and as daughters. They existed in Muslim law, Shariat law, as wives and daughters. So you have to imagine, this is hard for us to picture today, that this was a time when, and I will say this, when I look at some of the, as a women's studies scholar, when I look at some of the texts at the time, there was some, they didn't think of themselves as Hindu. They talk of themselves as simply women leaders. But they were Hindu. They were uneasy by the fact that Muslim women had more rights, that Hindu women had less rights. And the period of the 1920s, 30s, 40s, which was a period of intense, violent conflict between Muslims and Hindus, one of the sites of conflict, curiously, was a kind of rivalry over who could show better rights for women. So there were more rights being produced at that time. The Sharia reform law of 1938 and so on were done at the time in this rivalry to show we are better than them. This was a very strange period, difficult for us to imagine today. But then comes independence. Then comes the creation of the state of Pakistan. The story changes profoundly. And the women in the Constituent Assembly, there were 15 women in the Constituent Assembly. There are now 2 books, if those of you are interested, there are 2 books that look at the founding mothers of the Constitution and another book called The 15. I will say again in self-criticism that we in the women's studies context have not paid much attention to them because their voices are not heard in the pages of the Constituent Assembly debates. We think they didn't matter very much, but that's wrong. They were very, very active in many of the subcommittees. At that time, many of these marvelous women leaders who were spent years in jail for the freedom movement, they were very clear on one thing which we may now disagree with them. They did not want to see freedom of religion to come into the Constitution. Why not? Because they fear, they had seen this game going on, they had seen these battles going on, and they thought if freedom of religion actually comes into the constitution, it will be at the cost of women's rights. They saw this intense kind of conflict as being at women's cost. Of course, their views were overridden, and I think rightly so. Freedom of religion and religious practice did come into the constitution. They also believed, again, we may say they were wrong, or we may, how do we think about it? They believed uniformity was essential for equality. They could not, and I don't think it was a national integration argument. They really thought the two came together. They did so. And please understand, these are the most amazing women who fought decades for women under most difficult circumstances. Then what happens? We have the question of the Hindu Code Bill. I don't think the last word has been said on this, though again, very, very good research has been done on the Hindu Code Bill. It was mentioned that it took very, very long to be passed. It was meant to be passed well before independence. It couldn't be passed. Why? Because as Zoya pointed out, there was huge opposition from the Hindu right. And if you want to read about their views, their casteist views, their misogynist views, because it was Ambedkar who was in charge of, he was the law minister. He was in charge of putting this bill together. The question we may want to ask is, why a Hindu Code Bill at all when UCC was the dominant demand? One answer is what I said earlier, that Hindu women were worse off in legal terms than Muslim women. So there was a belief that yes, we must have Hindu law reform. There was nothing, there was no, you have to imagine a world in which Hindu law was outside the legal process. Okay? That's point number one. Point number two, and this is Ambedkar's point, and I don't know whether we have thought enough about it. He also invested in the Hindu Code Bill. Why would he, the man who opposed Hinduism tooth and nail, why would he be for a Hindu Code Bill? And my answer, this is a tentative answer, is that he saw gender equality for all Hindu women as the death knell of caste. Caste depended entirely on gender inequality. If you have a law which says any Hindu woman can marry any Hindu man, and under these conditions of full equality as a wife, full inheritance rights as daughters, full rights to divorce, caste will crumble, because caste cannot exist under these conditions. So you can imagine how upset he was when in fact the Hindu Code Bill, fragmented, was passed piecemeal in 1954-55, and he resigned, as you all know, very shortly before his death. He resigned as law minister. He said this new world, this new constitution has been built on a dung heap. This is the words, these are his words, when he saw what was happening here. Because I believe he saw caste and gender as deeply intertwined. One cannot become equal without the other, and this was the failure. So I'm trying to give you a context within which we must understand this history of ours. And the consequence after the creation of Pakistan was that constitutional rights which were actually to be made, minority rights which were actually in the making for Muslim women and Muslims as a whole, were totally frozen. After Pakistan, Muslim women became a minority in a way they had never experienced before. That was the consequence. Meanwhile, Pakistan creates all kinds of very good laws, right? They created good laws for women in the 1950s, not so here. Please understand. And meanwhile, Hindu Code Bill is passed in whatever fragmented form, and Hindu women, as I think has been mentioned, they do gain. Yes, they didn't gain full rights. Who the hell is going to gain full rights? But they were progressively, I will risk saying so, better off. Because they were on the path of reform, and further reform was possible. Co-parsonary rights came, various things came along the way. I do believe that and I disagree with Flavia on this particular point, because she said, no, actually it's illusory to imagine that Hindu women are better off. I do think they are. By virtue of entering the world of liberal reform, they're better off. Muslim women have lost out. And this became very clear in the Shah Banu case of 1986, which shocked everybody. Till that moment, if you look at the Towards Equality report, recently we've been celebrating 50 years of the Towards Equality report, which is the UN Year of Women report of 1975. Please see the law chapter, all of them, Latika Scott, fully behind a UCC. They give you all the various laws, but they're fully behind. They think there's no other way but the UCC. 1986, they are still, women's organizations still behind the UCC. But then they see what is happening. They see the fear, the sense that a UCC is being used as a stick to beat the identity of, that Muslims for the first time came to believe that their identity depended on Muslim personal law. What a tragedy that this equation was made at that time. It takes almost 10 years for women's groups to recognize this problem. And then in 1994, 95, 96, we see a very amazing, as I said, we're very bad at debating each other. But these years saw the most amazing writing. I don't think the equal has happened since then by women's organizations who disagreed profoundly with each other. So what did we have? We had people who said, no, we still need a UCC. Then there were people who said, well, we need a UCC, but let's make it optional. You can choose it if you so wish. Then there were those who said, let's make it reverse optional, which means you're born into a UCC, but at some point in your life, if you wish to step away from it and join some other kind of personal, other law, other form of being regulated, your choice. Later, you can choose to get out of it. Then there were those who said, no, we must work in this day and age. We must do reform within communities. The example of Christian law, which was an amazing. I come from one of these Christian communities, or my parents, I should say, to be honest. Bringing Protestants, I don't know if any of you know anything about the Christian church. There's no such thing as a Christian church. There are hundreds of denominations, Catholics, Protestants, evangelicals, all fighting each other, all saying you are heretic, you're this, you're that. Imagine bringing all this bundle of bishops and others onto one stage and saying we need divorce, because there was no divorce. What God has put together, let no man put asunder. This is somewhere in the Bible and was used to make the life of many Christian couples a misery. They managed to do this. 10 years, people like Jyotsna Chatterjee did this work. They did this, but it was such a labor. And after that, she had no energy for anything else. She gave her life for this. So, all these years, and I asked myself as a somewhat younger than all those who were so active in the 1990s, producing this rainbow of different possibilities. If you want to read about them, there's at least 2 places you can read about them. Nivedita Menon's excellent essay and Rajeshwari Sundarajan's less well known, but equally excellent essay, giving you the picture, the kinds of... But then what happened? I don't know, I want to ask them. I want to ask everyone, all these 20 years, no? 1995, 96. Something subsided. I'm not sure what. Something subsided, something rose. We know very well what rose. Hindutva rose, taking over the UCC, it would appear, but my question to ourselves, how did we let them do that? How could we let the BJP take over our campaign? How did we let it appear to be the case? Because as Rita has pointed out, it was in fact Muslim women who demanded triple talaq to end. They today want polygamy to end. It was not the BJP who set the ball rolling, it was Muslim organizations. Moreover, it is Muslim organizations, and I'm thinking of the Bharatiya Muslim Mahila Andolan, BMMA, I'm thinking of Bebak Collective. Can you imagine in times like the present, the most hate-filled times of the present, these groups have stood up and said, even at the risk of the BJP taking over our demands, we still want those demands. Even at the risk of our men going to jail, being criminalized if under triple talaq, we still want these. So my question to us, non-Muslim to that extent, is is there a failure of nerve on our part when in fact these women are willing to risk all this? So let me come to some thoughts for the present, and this maybe addresses the question of secularism a little bit. Why do we think that secularism is only to be understood in opposition to personal law? And this, I think, Zoya has said very, very well. And I'm thinking of the marvelous book, I don't know if you know, Zoya and Ritu Menon produced a book on Muslim women. And very interestingly, you would have thought it was all about personal law, isn't it? But it's not. There's no chapter even on personal law. I think some of people were angry with them. Why didn't you even put a chapter there? Amazing data, a huge data set on Muslim women's everyday lives, and some of the most amazing, I remember being there and commenting on it, and I found one of the most amazing data. Now this, I don't know, men may be a little disturbed by this, but large numbers of Muslim women are more educated than their husbands. What kind of a world, what kind of structures, what kind of inequalities does that mean? I mean, we should say wonderful for women, maybe, but there are all the wrong reasons why that is the case. Not for good feminist reasons, for very bad reasons, that this is the situation. Why do we think, and this is again a self-critical question, why do we think that religion is the worst kind of, there's an assumption, I think, that religion is the most patriarchal institution we live under. Not true. Do you know what is the most patriarchal institution? Indian economy. The Indian economy today, in India, we have the lowest work participation rates for women in the world. And I mean, the only country worse than us is Saudi Arabia. Do we feel better because Saudi Arabia is slightly worse than us? Not only is it down, it's going down further. In these years, last 20 years, the chances, including for educated women, to find work of any decent nature is very, very, very low. We have one of the most, how shall I say, hard, unchanging sexual divisions of labor in the world. Please, all of you, I don't know, maybe you're all very liberated, but please look at who does what work in your homes. Maybe students live a somewhat better life and you're all living in hostels, so it's somewhat suspended. The number of hours women perform in domestic work, unpaid domestic work, which occasionally then we transfer to the lowest, worst paid domestic workers to relieve us. That's what we do. Do we get other men in the household to take over? No, never. Even when women are working, they have that work. This is the worst. It is the least unchanging. Mind you, the whole world is also pretty bad on this. Masculinity is a pretty, I don't know what to say, somewhat inflexible, non-fluid, we all want fluid identities, yes, gender fluidity is a very wonderful thing, but please look at who does what work, and that fluidity will begin to crumble. Much worse than any religious patriarchy is the patriarchy of our economy, and what it is actually carrying out. And my question then is, why aren't we protesting that? I think that was also Zoya's question. Why aren't we going there? And of course, Muslim women are the worst. They are the least likely to have good jobs. They're the least likely. Within this, you could have a nice upper caste little bit more, OBQs a little bit, it goes down very neatly as per our wonderful Indian hierarchy, where the scheduled tribes and the Muslims are at the bottom. Why aren't we making a big noise about that? Why shouldn't that be a secular agenda? I can't think of a more secular agenda than this. But it is nowhere. And so I have a bit of a problem in Rajeshwari Sundarajan in her essay on the multiple problems of personal law reform. At the tail end of that chapter, please take a look. She says, she suggests that let us look at the sphere of work. Let us get women to mobilize around work. That might be a better area for us than this very messed up area of personal law reform. Now, she may be right in saying, yes, let's go there, but she's completely wrong if she thinks that's an easier space to work on. Look at what's going on even with our ASHA workers and others who are considered voluntary workers under the state, voluntary workers being paid a pittance. That is the situation. So, why in the name of our secularism aren't these of equal or greater importance than personal law? Finally, let me say, I agree now, today we are wiser than our foremothers in the Constituent Assembly. We know uniformity is not equal to equality. I think it was Brinda Karat who wrote about this, that, there's an essay she wrote on this issue, where she said, very interestingly, coming out of the EDWA situation, the rethinking. The rethinking, you must imagine the rethinking here for people wedded to the idea of UCC, that they say, no, uniformity is not a guarantee for equality. Now, my problem, it's a self-again, we have tended, please, maybe I'm exaggerating slightly, we have tended, therefore, to say the great value of our nation is diversity. The great value of our nation is heterogeneity. No, I disagree. Heterogeneity, diversity is a fact of life. It's not some ideal, it's a fact of life. It's how we are. We are diverse in 100 different ways. Why should that be an ideal? This I don't get. Our ideal should continue to be equality. What we now have are diverse ways of being unequal. Please let's understand. If uniformity does not equal equality, diversity also does not equal equality. There's some, slipping, sliding going on over here. Why do we think indigenous communities, there's a lot of romanticism around indigenous communities, that they're somehow so wonderful, they have the best property rights, women have so much more freedom. I'm sorry, I disagree. There's witch hunting going on in Adivasi communities. Minority have been caught in the prison house of community identity. So we should take the risk and let us look at I was married under the Special Marriages Act. I was shocked when I discovered it's just a little bit of a modification of the Hindu Marriages Act. It's not at all a good act. I don't know why the marriage equality fighters want the SMA to be modified. It's a terrible act. If I want to adopt a child, what are my rights? We have the Hindus have had adoption, but please ask yourself why? Why? Because if a Hindu family only has daughters, they wanted to be able to take a son from some other cousin somewhere to ensure that the son inherits this adopted son and the girls don't get it. That's the history of law. Muslims cannot adopt. Christians cannot adopt. If we wish to, we have to go to some little corner of the Juvenile Justice Act to try and get adoption. Otherwise, we can only be guardians, whatever that means. So we have some lousy laws of various kinds. So I ask myself, why shouldn't I look for the best practices which could apply to anyone? If New Zealand has excellent divorce laws, if Scandinavia has excellent adoption laws for children, we have very hopeless laws for children. We talk a lot about marriage and divorce. What do we have to say about child rights? I don't think any, please, again, don't correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think if I look into our great and ancient civilization, I will find anything on child rights. Because children were being married off at the age of 8, 9, whatever, when they were children. So please don't ask me to look for something in the Mahabharata or wherever for children. We will have to look elsewhere. And we should be willing and confident to look elsewhere and make them ours. Why do we think that, unless it's somehow indigenous, it is the only way to make it ours? No, we have to make it ours. Just as telephones and anything else, we have made ours. IT and everything is not ours, but we made it ours. So why are women bearing this burden of difference when this is not the case anywhere else? Okay, so I'm asking ourselves, therefore, to rethink, and to conclude, I want to agree completely with this very scary picture. Now, you're a lawyer, so you have to answer for this. Why are we putting so much faith in the law? Because this is being turned against us. From being something we thought would be a tool for liberation, is turning into a tool for control, right, of the worst kind. Why are we putting so much faith in the law? I have been fighting this question of the minimum age of marriage, which is supposed to be raised from 18 to 21. So that now all women are children till the age of 21 for purposes of marriage. All in the name of gender equality. Why? Why are we allowing the current system to criminalize as a way of emancipation? So let us ask ourselves, what is it that we want from the state and what do we not want from the state when it comes to families, when it comes to our love lives, when it comes to our labor lives, when it comes to our friendships, when it comes to how we bring up our children? What parts of that ought to be regulated? I would ask a lawyer to tell us. And what parts should jolly well be left away? What parts should the state be providing policies to enable us to live better lives? What parts should be ours alone? I'll stop there. Thank you.